Hi everyone, thank you for joining us on today's webinar. My name is Bethany and I'm the Relationship and Engagement Manager here at UMI. And today I'm joined by my colleague Lee, who is our HR business partner.
Hi everyone.
Here at UMI, we help businesses by taking the hard work out finding the very best expertise, information and finance. That's why we're here today with one of the very best experts on workplace rights, rules and best practice. Before we dive in, if you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the Q&A chat box in your Zoom control panel. Now, without further ado, today we're here to explore and discuss how to manage remote working. And on that note, I'd like to introduce our guest. So today we have Ian from Acas, and they give free impartial advice on employment rights and also offer training and help to resolve disputes. Hi Ian, would you like to tell us a little bit more about yourself and Acas?
Absolutely. Good morning, Bethany and Lee, and of course, welcome to everybody out there in the virtual world. Yeah, my name's Ian Mastaglio. I'm a senior advisor and the training manager with Acas, based in the northeast of England. Our office location is based in Newcastle upon Tyne. In terms of my role, typically day to day, I'm actually out on the road, so it's quite surreal to be here actually on a live digital platform, actually having a chat. But very welcome, nevertheless, to actually have conversations. And part and parcel of my role is actually to go out and provide advice on the A to Z of everything associated with the employment relationship. That's the legal side, it's the people side, and where today's focus comes from. I deliver training, I check over policies, I get involved in the dispute resolution side of Acas's work as well. So it's a multitude of many things, jack of all trades, potentially master of none, but we'll see how we go on that.
That's great, thanks Ian. So what common challenges are being experienced amongst leaders when it comes to managing remote working?
Right, well, I mean, it's clearly over the last sort of 6 or 7 weeks, the transition or the challenges and the barriers that everyone sort of immediately found themselves in, almost for many tipped their whole world upside down. That's from a domestic perspective and indeed a working perspective. Now, on a first point, actually, there will be many businesses and many individuals out in the working environment that have actually had good, solid, flexible working practices for quite some time. So, and when people are sort of think of remote working, it's not just people who are working from home. It actually also includes those individuals who are actually out on the road, or individuals who are detached on a day-to-day basis from their line management route. But of course, that said, for a good percentage of individuals, what occurred sort of in mid-March was I'm trying to avoid using that phrase unprecedented, but it really was very different. And at the drop of a hat, many of us found ourselves basically saying, if we can work from home, work from home. And so in terms of your question there about biggest challenges, I mean, my footnote would be what the communication process and how we keep in touch with our teams, with our individuals, with our peer colleagues, overnight became a challenge. And as people have moved on through this lockdown, finding that right balance to actually generate and create the best possible relationship between manager, worker, employee, peers. I think that's been the biggest challenge actually out there. And you'll find many differing variables on how people have approached that sort of communication process. And I suppose if I was to make one really sort of crucial comment on that, and I'm coming here at things from my organization's perspective, because individuals are obviously confronted in for some, a very emotive and sensitive scenario, the last thing that should be encouraged of managers in a remote working capacity would be maybe that perspective of micromanaging and overly controlling, all of their employees. So I would want to champion, in particular at this moment in time, the compassionate approach to managing remotely, the people approach. And there's been a lot of information cascaded over the last sort of few weeks by all sorts of individuals on behaviors. And I suppose just to give a final footnote on your question there, I actually do think people will remember and recall how they have been managed or how they are being managed at this moment in time. Really important, and there's many more questions to come arising out of it, but that's my introductory comment on that on that question.
That's great. So in terms of, leaders effectively managing performance, but not doing it in a way that's micromanaging, doing it from a place of compassion, how can they do that effectively, but also manage their performance as well?
Right. Well, in the first instance, actually, Bethany, I would suggest that the focus, and I do acknowledge, by the way, the job has to be done. Absolutely, that you want that balance to be right, but I rather hope there's an accentuation on managing the positives that are occurring over this particular part of time, reflecting the achievements, reflecting the innovations that individuals have had during this particular period, so if you are a manager, or I am a manager, and you're actually acknowledging what's been done well, as we always should be. I mean, this isn't different for in a remote working capacity. If we can recognize a job done well, reflect it in the right manner at the right time, albeit that we're in a remote sort of working situation for many at the moment, that's going to pay dividends in terms of engagement. It's going to pay dividends in terms of motivation, and it should be a part of the journey to getting the best from your staff. So that would be my initial footnote on that, the accentuating the positives. Now, I know there'll be another side of the story to that as well, but that's, again, certainly my accentuation on that question, Bethany.
Okay.
Great. And Ian, how will leaders promote engagement?
Right. I mean, again, much of the conversation here is going to actually impinge on what communication sort of routes they're actually establishing. I mean, again, this should, in the normal day-to-day working environment, what would we be doing in terms of generating rapport, building dialogue, retaining enthusiasm? It just becomes that little bit more harder. So, and this applies to your organization and anyone sort of out there, what communication mediums are they actually using to get that effective engagement? I rather imagine there'll be a big combination of ranging from digital platforms, such as people using Microsoft Teams, using Skype, using Zoom, simple phone calls, obviously keeping in touch with via email, peer-to-peer. You'll no doubt get all the various social media forums as well. Actually, rather ironically, I've had a comment from my organization: why can't we just use one medium and one medium only? Well, actually, a range of mediums are actually, I would suggest, is appropriate, because different individuals probably want to be managed and engaged through a different way, and tapping into those differences is essential. And how are we getting the balance right as well? The virtual meetup, what you might call the virtual cup of coffee, the virtual mess room chat, or in the manufacturing environment, the toolbox talk that you have at the beginning of the day. How are they still happening? The virtual huddle, and so there's all sorts of phrases coming out about at the moment with regard to this, and I will go through this one as well in. Crucially, at this moment in time, I actually think conversations about non-work issues, the social interactions, which are a part of the work environment, they're important, really important. So I'm hoping that our managers, our business owners are tapping in and just saying, hey Lee, how are you doing? What's the family up to? What's your favorite album at the moment? What are you missing most? And just those sort of the tea room chats. So again, that's just another little footnote on retaining that continuity and balance. I hope that helps and answers your question in some way, Lee.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
And so in terms of health and well-being then, what practices can people integrate into the working from home routine?
Right. I mean, health and well-being is unsurprisingly at this moment in time is reared its head massively. And of course, this week is Mental Health Awareness Week as well. So in terms of what are we doing to accentuate that in terms of identifying triggers? I mean, I could come up with a whole host of sort of reflections. First and foremost, I hope there's support mechanisms in place. Support mechanism place in businesses can be the line manager, can be a fair treatment officer, can be a mental health first aider, and then you can move into other things of, well, what are people doing to actually look after their own well-being? Managers have a responsibility, but actually this is a two-way street as well. The individuals themselves have a responsibility. So I could probably pose the question back to you and I, are we taking breaks? Are we still indulging sort of that time in terms of our interests? Do we switch our mobiles and phones off at the end of the working day? Guilty on that one sometimes. And are we looking out for each other? And I mean, if I was to just give a sort of a little bit of a footnote to sort of some of, I mean, in terms of stress, there's some helpful sort of what you might call a traffic light system on the Health and Safety Executive website, a 6-light trigger system that looks at things such as demands, control, relationships, and of course change. But really, I think it's just having a look out and tapping into the non-verbal signs. But I think our well-being and our self-care and our looking out for each other, that's a mutual responsibility for us all. There's been a phrase actually used over the past sort of 7-8 weeks related to people's behaviors and kindness. So I'm using a little bit of a cliche there when I use that word kindness, but I do ask the open question, what have people noticed about our behaviors during this particular period?
And you mentioned there about non-verbal behaviours. What would you say people should look out for? What kind of signs can people engage with in terms of finding out if someone's stressed or maybe overwhelmed as well?
Yeah, that can be a tricky one actually as well. Because in my day-to-day role, in face-to-face interactions, the signs will be clearly a lot more visible. So in terms of actually tapping in to those signs in a non-verbal environment, that's where the communication side has a greater resonance. So actually, I'm going to make a personal promotion here. I would hope that individuals are encouraging and embracing, let's say, video digital platforms such as Microsoft Teams. That might not be everyone's comfort factor. People in either a one-on-one situation and a team situation might say, that's not how I want to communicate. But it's just one way of maybe getting that little bit more from the communication and picking up on the signs. Clearly, there's other signs as well, such as are individuals becoming detached from communication? Are their emails either getting shorter or longer, getting more curt or expansive, and various sort of signs that might just give a clue. And actually just reflecting back there to one point I touched on in my conversation there, I hope managers are also not just doing the team meetings, but doing the one-on-ones. And so that really gives an extra enhancement about sort of checking in on the well-being and the health side as well. And you know what? We've still got to have fun as well. So so the fun aspect, and there has seriously been in the work environment amongst teams and individuals. I've come across, I mean, I've been running this type of a session regularly over the last sort of few weeks, and there's been some great fun ideas of what kept things ticking on in work environments. If anyone wants quiz on album covers down the last 4 decades, send one out. 70s is my time period, as you might have gathered. So any album covers in the current sort of decade, that's where my son comes and helps me.
No, that's brilliant. Thanks, Ian, and definitely agree on what you've said. You definitely have to have that balance between work and life.
Yeah.
So how do leaders foster and develop relationships?
Right. Do you know what? I would probably, a part of my habit is always to bounce the question back to anyone who asks me the question. So, and I know you're asking me the question, but I would always, so if you were actually getting a new member of staff joining your business here and now, what would you be doing? Of course, we're actually in that challenging environment now. So we've actually got 8 new members that joined the Acas Newcastle team just this week in one job function area. So in terms of what we are doing to develop the relationships, yes, there's the virtual world presents some problems. So we're having to be quite precise in terms of our induction package to get that dialogue and get that rapport going and get that camaraderie going. So so some of the communicative processes, giving that example I've used, have become actually quite structured, but I hope sufficient balance to give time for people to have that breath of fresh air, time out, and also as well, I know it's a little bit of a cliche, but visibility. How can the management side become as accessible and as visible and as supportive as possible? So just a comment I had reflected back to me yesterday on one of these sessions, and it was a really pleasant comment, and the individuals reflected, my manager has made themselves accessible almost 24/7. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that a manager should do that, but I am sort of reflecting that the manager perhaps has that responsibility to model the behavior that they want to see from within their own staff and teams. That's a starting point.
And so how do leaders cultivate healthy habits then? You know, for example, when to step away from the working environment, what would you kind of suggest there?
That comes, I think for me, that comes back to picking up on the signs when someone's, it's not about someone doing too much, but I think it's just recognizing that actually the downside of the work environment is important. So the taking the break, the time for a team meeting, the time for a coffee, the time for people to sort of take leave. And if I was to get sort of slightly serious as well on the health side and healthy habits, discourage presenteeism in the work environment. There may be some scenarios whereby a manager or an employee, perhaps the employee is under the weather, not feeling too great, 1 or 2 things on their mind, and the subsequent comment might be, come on, Ian, you haven't got to go out the front door this morning. Just turn your laptop on and off you go. Well, actually, that might not be the healthy approach to what someone is experiencing at that moment in time. So I do think conversations do need to happen and do need to occur regarding when it's appropriate and right for someone to take that time out. So I know there was a variety of themes mentioned in answering your question there, ranging from the simplicity of taking a walk and going for some fresh air to, if you're actually suffering under the weather, actually make yourself absent from work. So there's a combination of things in that. I hope that answers your question there to some degree.
Yeah, brilliant. So Ian, what could managers do in order to effectively maintain open communication between remote workers?
Yeah, it'll not surprise you that obviously my response to this one to some degree duplicates some of my other reflections. For me, I mean, I'll give you my personal example because I'm a manager of a team in my environment as well. I've established a continuity and a balance between having one-on-ones and having a team meeting. Now, what the right balance is different for every working environment and perhaps different for each individual, but I have a team meeting every week. I have a catch-up on a one-on-one with my team members every week. That is not always going to be about work. It'll often just be, how are you? And I'm conscious that much of this chat so far that I'm touching on has been very much about the people side of things. So I will just throw something in regarding the business side as well. I still think it's absolutely important for a manager to actually still give clarity and conciseness regarding any actions or job functions that do need to be done. So if I was wanting a staff member to basically fulfill a task, then there still needs to be that conversation of why I'm asking this, what needs to be done, when it needs to be done, why it needs to be done, and what support do you need to get it done. Now, of course, I mean, my management style is very hands-off. So linking into some of our previous reflections, I actually embrace a lot of trust in my colleagues. I really do. I really believe that they are there and want to do an excellent job. I think that's what we expect and want from most of our people. So that's a part and parcel of my style. To turn it slightly around as well, I actually think it's well worth asking your employees, what do they want from their manager? Ask the question. And I would. So if you were an employee of mine, actually, Lee, I'd be saying, Lee, what do you expect from me in terms of contact? What works for you? And all simple stuff. I mean, I actually don't think much of this is actually rocket science. It's common good sense from which we're in an environment at the moment where the commonalities or the norm have disappeared to some degree. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, thank you.
So just as an extension of that then, how do leaders know that staff are receptive to the communication style and know they can ask, but what else could they look out for in terms of making sure that people are responsive?
Right. I mean, again, I ask the question actually on that, Bethany. I hope, I mean, for my staff members, I'm saying, has this worked for you? What's not working for you? And of course, what other support might they need? I'm well aware that today's session is not touched on, for example, the compliance side, the risk assessment side, the health and safety side, and the equipment side as well, and it's quite intentional that we're not touching on that today. But nevertheless, those scenarios will come into play on some of this sort of scenario. Have our staff got what they need to make the best of the current circumstances? And if not, what can we do mutually to actually help them? So again, much of that comes back for getting their feedback, and it's a two-way street. And again, my management style is not a case of isn't not dictatorial. I say you do. No, we're in this together. We are a team, and let's encourage and foster that.
Yeah, we've had a comment through. Suggestions for keeping furloughed employees engaged and feeling like they're still part of the business.
Right. Yeah, and they are part of the business. Hey, absolutely they are. So, it's probably a question that what would a manager do, for example, with let's say a female member of staff who was on maternity leave? They would still keep in touch. They would still keep that individual up to date. They would still make that individual aware of secondment opportunities, promotion opportunities, and they would still be part and a parcel of the team meetings. So albeit that we're in this rather surreal circumstances of furlough, and up until March, no one had ever even heard of the word before, which in simple terms, the member of staff, that the employee, they're still an employee. They are not required to be at work. But my cliched phrase on this one, I hope, is out of sight, but not out of mind. So, which really sums up. Again, what does a manager do if an individual is on long-term sick? You make arrangements to keep in touch. So Nothing changes. And if you want to keep the camaraderie going, come back to your innovative sort of perspectives. And I bet your good selves and all of our people out there in the virtual world have got a whole host of things where they can have a right laugh at. Some of them appropriate for the work environment, maybe some not.
Thanks, Ian. We've had another question come through. So there's somebody that's saying they've had comments from various workplaces about an atmosphere developing between on-site workers and home workers, where the perception is different workloads, and that they feel that this is unfair. Have you got any comments on this?
Actually, it's again, that question, it's a regular and common question, and that question won't go away. And the key phrase you used there, actually, Lee, perception. So I suppose because that perception will exist, then within reason, the manager has to have the chat to actually reflect that that we have this, we're aware of consciousness, we're in control of the scenario, we're striving to create and generate the appropriate balance with regard to whatever the scenario actually is. But also do be aware that in the background, there could be genuine reasons why there might even be an imbalance as well, such as for example, shielding requirements as well. I don't think that you're going to be able to remove those perceptions overnight, but I do think it's healthy that they're aired, and I do think it's healthy that the manager has an opportunity to respond to it as well. So have the chat, have the conversation, don't leave issues festering, but be conscious of any confidentialities that might be hovering in the background regarding a rationale or an explanation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's great. We've had another question as well. If relationships have been damaged between employers and staff during this difficult period, how can they go about recovering the situation? Basically looking for an employer strategy to repair a relationship and re-engage the member of staff.
Right. I mean, in terms of repairing the relationship, I would hope that internally at work, the manager, the organization, the individuals themselves have that capacity and that responsibility to actually address their own issues. So from an Acas perspective, we shift the responsibility internally back to the manager, the HR, if depending on the size of the business, and the employees themselves. What can they do to actually overcome the breakdown? If that can't be achieved, it won't surprise you that as an individual that works for Acas, I would say you may want to turn to external help, such as mediation, or even just adopting a mediatory approach. And in its most basic, simplistic term, all I mean by mediation is giving both perspectives, coming back to your earlier phrase, airtime, so that each perspective can be heard, but still that the parties can find common ground because they have the responsibility to make their work relationship work. Now, a part of my job actually is to undertake mediations, and ironically, I'm doing a virtual mediation this week as well. That's going to be a little bit of a challenge in a digital platform, because I would say I suppose enhancing workplace relationships has greater prospects of success if you can actually speak, sit down face to face, and see where each other is coming from. But my pushback is the responsibility has to sit with the parties, because if they can't work it out, then the subsequent question from me is, if this doesn't work out successfully, what next? And the what next might not be a very comfortable route. It could involve performance issues, it could involve conduct issues, it could involve someone thinking this work environment's not for me, and off they go. So harness the responsibility. If you need external help, it could be via a route such as mediation, such as via ourselves. There's obviously many other sources out there as well.
Great, thanks, Ian.
You're welcome.
So we've had another question come through. What role do trade unions have in this crisis process?
Oh, a big role, and I'm well aware that out in the working environment, there will be many organisations that do not have trade union recognition, particularly the small and medium businesses. In the larger business environments, the union representative side or the union recognition side, I would say it's an absolute must that management involve the union the union representative source in communication issues, in consultation issues, and most importantly, as you move into, I suppose, sadly, the more sort of serious end of the scale for decision making and decisions, because rather sadly there are some difficult times in many working environments as well. And if there's trade union recognition on board, it's a must. It's actually, and never mind almost, it's a legal obligation as well. Yes, please. And actually, if I want to go a bit further on that, again, I am a personal big fan of workplace environments that have non-union representative sources. So involve the employee forums and the staff forums as well. It helps to just get that the wider view back to perspectives again.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We've
definitely.
a comment saying staff at this workplace are being told they can't work from home, even though they're only doing emails and PC-based work when actually at the workplace. They also want to work from home and feel that they are being unfairly asked to come into the office, exposing themselves to potential risk from COVID unnecessarily. What's the answer?
Yeah, I couldn't give an answer in a set sort of 1-2 minutes actually, Bethany. Clearly, it's about a risk assessment, and as we come out of the lockdown period, and I'm aware that many businesses are already operating within reason to the current sort of existing circumstances. Conversations obviously have to be had to ensure that the well-being and a duty of care for employer to employee is actually sufficiently established. I suppose on the downside of where we are currently at from an Acas perspective, I rather imagine in weeks to come there might be some challenges regarding how employers have established a sufficiently safe and robust work environment for their employees. Again, the first part of call will be have the conversation internally at your workplace. And by all means, for any individual who's asking that question out there, ring the Acas helpline or tap onto the Acas guidance. There's an awful lot of guidance out there, but I would need to know a little bit more about context to be able to give a precise answer. But Acas helpline is a good place to start.
Great, thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. So Ian, how do leaders manage employees' conduct and performance when remote working? That's
a good one, actually, a really good one. Again, as ever, I often, I've said this phrase, I bounce the question back. To me, it's no different. Yes, it might be that we are, let's say, working remotely, and therefore the intimacy of the contact has diminished. But if a conduct issue arises, the principles of following your own internal procedural process are there as though they were always there. Nothing's changed. There's still that obligation on the employer, the manager, to actually conduct an appropriate balanced investigation. Now, can meetings be conducted via a digital platform? I'll be the first to say it's not ideal, but they can be. And in terms of expedience and use of time, the employer and indeed the employee and indeed any accompanying individuals in the process, there will be employers out there who are progressing such issues through digital platforms. Not ideal, I'm first to admit that, but definitely still tenable. And I wouldn't be suggesting to an employer, oh, just park it to one side until we're all back to normal. I think most employers would take the view, we need to actually address this quickly. And again, an add-on to that would be, actually, if you're addressing your conduct issues, and of course your performance issues, at early door point, hopefully the formal question, do we take this formal, will never occur anyway.
Great. And do you have any advice for top management who is struggling to accept remote working and are fighting against it?
Did you, I have a right. It's a really tough one, that one, actually, a really tough one, because again, it's a conversation waiting to happen, and actually, I'd welcome that conversation. Now, from a compassionate perspective, I can tap into that view because that's me. I would rather not be conducting my communications unilaterally through this type of a medium. I want to be on the road. I want to be meeting my customers. I want to have the face-to-face communications. But the bottom line is, on the word change, change we must. And whilst we've got to be compassionate, whilst we've got to support, whilst we've got to actually acknowledge emotions that are out there, there still is a job to be done. And to maybe use myself as an example, if I was to be reflecting back to my employer saying, no, I won't do that, or I can't do that, then there's a conversation coming my way. If it's the I can't do that, it's what support, what training, what help do you need, Ian? If I won't do that, it's potentially a conduct issue. But let's not jump headfirst into this. Let's have the chat, because these are surreal times. They really are. And in the short to medium term, we're perhaps in a difficult situation. And for the foreseeable future, I'm having to change all my working mediums and modes. Do I want that? No, not really. But I've got to do it. And that's a tough one. Definitely a tough one. So I share the emotion from that question.
We had another comment come through as well. Two quick questions. What role do trade unions have in this crisis process? And could Ian just remind us of the HSE 6 test I think he mentioned earlier?
I do. I mean, the HSE 6 tests are probably right there. By all means, just if you were to go into Google, just pop in health and safety executive 6 triggers, and they are demands. They are control, they are support, they are relationships, they are role, and what I mean by role, autonomy. And what autonomy do you have in your own role? And finally, the biggest one that's impacting on us all at the moment, change. Because this is a changing time. It's worth a little read, because it's just a simplistic sort of what you might call a traffic light type system. And some of those 6 triggers can be impacting on us at different times. And it'll be different for everyone as well.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Ian. Another quick question that's come through. So in situations of manufacturing where you have staff who must work from home through government direction and staff who cannot work from home, how can this be managed? The previous strategy has been an inclusive workplace where everyone is treated the same, but this now cannot be in place. How can employers effectively deal with this?
Well, the bottom line is you want to treat everyone fairly and balancedly, but that doesn't necessarily mean treating everyone the same. Actually, the principles of fairness and balance are perhaps different to what needs to be in place to actually ensure that the work gets done. So even coming back to I suppose the concept of equality in the workplace. Equality is actually not about treating everyone the same. It's actually about recognizing that differences need to be addressed, and then treating everyone with fairness and balance. Now, so in terms of moving that ahead, yeah, actually on a point of fact, there's going to be some circumstances where for some people, that's the right environment to be in, and for others, maybe not. That is also going to apply in my own work environment. I know arising out of this, there's going to be some really quite not necessarily tough conversations, but the penny is going to drop in terms of new ways of working that are either appropriate and working for us, or where people feel that's not good. A lot of unanswered questions, and in some ways more questions than answers at the moment. The Acas helpline environment, all 100% of our employees on the Acas helpline are office-based. When we come out of this scenario, that will not be the case. Definitely not. So it ties in with that question, and there'll probably be conversations to have as to why someone can work from home and why someone else can't do. but of course, what can the employer do to ensure that it still fits the need to get the job done? In the manufacturing environment, of course, for many, it might not be tenable, particularly in the shop floor environments. Perhaps in, let's say, the administrative environments, there's greater flexibilities tenable.
We've had another question come through as well. I'm getting a lot of queries from BAME staff that feel they should be allowed to work from home due to the increased COVID risk, but how do they progress this if the line manager has already been less than receptive to this?
I mean, I'm conscious of where that question is coming from, because obviously via the news media, there's obviously suggestions related to statistical sort of reflections on vulnerabilities. But I've still got to give, I suppose, a relatively sort of a consistent answer, which would apply to any individual of the conversation still has to occur with your immediate line manager. It's disappointing, I might add, that a manager is not receptive to the question and the query, because I would suggest that from a personal perspective, if I was the manager that was dismissive of any reflection coming to me, then that would erode the relationship in the workplace. So again, and in terms of the soft skills that managers exercise in the working environment, their etiquette, their non-verbal, their tone, how they modulate their voice, all of this helps to at least facilitate the conversation. But that conversation still needs to be occurred. It's not the point that's being made is not one that doesn't have any validity, but it does have to be addressed. But again, and of course, the prescriptive answer on some of these issues, it's not out there yet. It's not actually out there. So I couldn't give a prescriptive answer, but I am disappointed by the reflection that the individual perhaps hasn't had the receptiveness or the compassion from their manager to at least talk.
Thank you, Ian.
We've had another question come through. How can managers and leaders during periods of remote working increase productivity within their teams?
Yeah, you would. That's now a general response here. There obviously is the response, the requirement to still do the job. I've come across some examples that actually their working environment has been enhanced and it's given a bit of a kickstart. But I think that's likely to be maybe not the norm. It still comes back to management style and effective communication and the capacity to engender the appropriate approach. Now, I'm going to use another cliche here on this one. Many individuals don't necessarily leave the job or leave their workplace, they leave a manager. So if you've had a relationship with a manager that's effective and conducive to your job function, you'll probably want to be more productive and be more motivated for that manager. So I think it really sort of instills that a core focus is about that immediacy of the relationship from manager to peer worker. That's a little bit of my take on it. My director in the work environment, I have to say his people skills are lovely and are really lovely. That enhances a willingness for people to want to do their best. So a lot of this is all coming back to the people skills. Really, it really is. That's my take on it, and it's free for a debate.
And do you think there'll be a change in culture after this, with more businesses, working from home more permanently compared to before?
Can I give a one-word answer?
Yes.
Yes. First time I've given a one-word answer. Without a doubt, I know I could elaborate. Yes, and even for example, meetings. I mean, you for your good selves and our people out there as well. And whilst it's nice and probably more welcome to have the face-to-face meeting, one of the questions you'll be asking will be: is it necessary to do it, to actually meet up, particularly if it involves travel? Just because the benefits of remote working, and I know this is something that we haven't gone into sort of touch on, but actually amongst the advantages and disadvantages, there's a lot of benefits in terms of potential productivity on time, costs, and actually innovations as well. So yes, it's definitely going to change things. Some will be absolutely for the better, some definitely not so on the people interaction side. There isn't a set answer to it, but yes is my one-word answer.
That's great.
Brilliant, thank you.
You're welcome.
We've had another question come through. What is the best way to record activity when home working, or prove you are putting the hours in, i.e. work diaries, tasks achieved?
I mean, that's going to be individual to every single different workplace in terms of what expectations are placed on their employees for I hate this phrase, utilization. What a awful phrase. Needs to be kicked into touch. But how do we actually utilize our time? But do you know what? I'm going to. I rather hope that just in the current circumstances, where we can, that the accentuation on how people are filling their time up. I'm not saying it needs to be put to one side, but I hope it's relaxed, and the key issue is trust. My workers are doing a good job. They're doing it to the best of their effect. They're utilizing their time well, and if they're not, we're here to help. So I'm still going to come back to the people side on that, but yes, we're still expected to get the productivity there. We in my work environment, we've got what's called a statistical recording base for how we use our time. What do other workplaces do? How prescriptive is it? Does it even need to be prescriptive? Do we make use of our work diaries? One thing that I've found, and actually this is coming back to challenges as well, many of us are now working in a paperless environment. Not a stroke of paper about. For some, that can be a struggle. So, it's an individual sort of reflection for each company. But I hope we're not being too heavy-handed on micromanaging that.
Yeah, great. And we've got time for just one more question that we've had come through. If a staff member wants to work more flexibly after experiencing the benefits of remote work, and is there a way to request this that isn't based on career responsibilities or an official flexible working request? What if it just suits you better?
Well, you've almost answered the question yourself there, Bethany. I mean, you can, of course, just arrive at a simple agreement between employer and employee. But unsurprisingly, from an Acas perspective, I'll probably reflect that actually, if there's an intention or for one party to actually want the arrangement to be permanent, then I would suggest you do go through the flexible working route, where there's obviously help and advice on what that entails through the Acas website. And indeed, many of the businesses out there will probably have their own sort of reflections on how they will address flexible working requests. And why not? And anybody now, in the days gone by from the dark, distant past, it was only open to individuals with certain circumstances in their domestics. Anybody can request it now, but do be aware the employer can say no. So that's just.
Well, thank you, Ian, for joining us today. It's been really valuable. Is there anything you'd like to add before we go?
I've actually enjoyed it. I mean, I enjoy anything on a people basis, even digital platforms. So it's been nice to have your company, to see the questions coming through from your delegates, and just so. Just thanks for inviting me, and obviously individuals out there can tap into your help sources and tap into the Acas web sources. And I've got no qualm with my email address being there, given out to individuals as well. What I don't pass out is my phone number, because I just get bombarded. There you go. But thank you everyone out there.
Well, thank you for watching. And if you'd like any more information, we have a number of articles and how-to guides to businesses if you go to our website at www.weareumi.co.uk. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Cheers, Bethany. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.